How do you tell a princess from the stars that saving her life was the biggest mistake you ever made? I had been dodging Princess Lyria of the Celestian Empire for 3 weeks, 17 hours, and 42 minutes. Not that I was counting obsessively or anything, but when you're being hunted by the most persistent alien dignitary in the diplomatic sector, you learn to track time like your life depends on it, because honestly, mine did. My name is Marcus Chen, Junior Xenocultural Liaison, which is a fancy way of saying, I'm the person who makes sure visiting aliens don't accidentally start intergalactic incidents when they mistake our customs for insults. And I was exceptionally good at my job, until the day I pulled Princess Lyria out of a malfunctioning airlock and discovered that in Celestian culture, saving someone's life means you literally own their fate. The station's corridors had become my personal obstacle course as I memorized her schedule, took alternate routes, and even ate my meals in the maintenance tunnels like some kind of cafeteria-avoiding rat, all to prevent the inevitable confrontation I knew was coming. Lyria wasn't just any alien princess. She was devastatingly brilliant, with those distinctive pointed ears that marked her royal bloodline, platinum hair that seemed to catch light that wasn't even there, and a slight luminescent glow to her skin that intensified when she was emotional, which I'd noticed from my carefully maintained distance, was happening more frequently as my avoidance continued. I'd watch her sometimes from across the observation deck, trying not to feel like a complete coward as she searched crowds with those expressive violet eyes that could probably see through solid steel if they wanted to. And I'd duck behind support columns or suddenly become very interested in data pads while my heart hammered against my ribs. What made everything worse was that I actually wanted to talk to her. During the airlock incident, in those terrifying seconds when I'd override the emergency protocols and physically dragged her from the decompressing chamber, she'd looked at me with such genuine gratitude and something else, something warm and curious that made my stomach flip. And then her advisor had arrived and explained in horrified tones that I'd just invoked the Talshera bond, an ancient Celestian tradition where a life debt creates an unbreakable connection between the souls, meaning every major decision in her life now required my consultation, my approval, my presence. You don't understand, her advisor had said, looking at me like I'd just adopted a supernova. The princess cannot make political decisions, marriage arrangements, or treaty negotiations without the input of her life binder. You've essentially become her fate companion. The weight of an entire empire's political future suddenly resting on my very unqualified shoulders had sent me into what I'd like to call a strategic retreat, but was, honestly, just panic-fueled avoidance. I'd researched everything about the Talshera bond in those first few days, learning that it was considered one of the most sacred connections in Celestian society, that breaking it required either mutual agreement or the death of one party, and that princesses had historically married their life binders more than 70% of the time, which explained why Lyria's entire diplomatic entourage had been giving me looks that ranged from curious assessment to outright hostility. My best friend Rachel thought I was being an idiot. Let me get this straight, she'd said, over contraband coffee in Maintenance Tunnel 7. A gorgeous, intelligent alien princess is culturally bound to seek your guidance and companionship. And you're hiding in the literal sewage processing level? I'd tried to explain that it wasn't about Lyria being alien or royal. It was about the suffocating pressure of having someone's entire existence tied to mine through no choice of either of ours. That I couldn't bear the thought of her being trapped by tradition into a connection with someone she didn't choose. That every time I imagined facing her I saw disappointment in those luminous eyes, when she realized the person fate had bound her to was just a mid-level bureaucrat who still couldn't figure out Zentari pronouns after 2 years on the station. You're projecting, Rachel had said flatly, which was probably her psychology degree talking, but I'd ignored her and perfected my Lyria avoidance protocols instead. The close calls had been getting closer though, like the time I'd rounded a corner and nearly collided with her entourage, forcing me to literally leap into a janitorial closet, where I'd held my breath for 15 minutes while her guard swept past. Or when I'd been trapped in an elevator and she'd entered on deck 9, causing me to fake a critical emergency call and army crawl through the maintenance hatch in the ceiling while her confused lady-in-waiting asked if human behavior was always this erratic. Week 3 was when I noticed the change in her. From my various hiding spots and carefully timed observations, I saw that the regal confidence she'd carried had started to dim, like someone was slowly turning down her inner light. Literally, because her bioluminescent glow had faded to barely a shimmer. She stopped searching crowds and started moving through the station with her shoulders curved inward, protective, hurt. Her guards seemed worried, conferring in hushed tones, and I overheard one mention that the princess had barely eaten in days and had declined all entertainment and social engagements. Guilt gnawed at my insides like a parasitic worm from Theta 7. But what could I say to her that wouldn't make everything worse? Sorry, I saved your life and then disappeared like a ghost because I'm terrified of the responsibility. And also maybe developing feelings for someone who deserves better than a coward hiding in maintenance tunnels. That would go over fantastically. But then came the morning when my carefully constructed avoidance system completely shattered. I'd timed my breakfast run perfectly. Knowing Lyria's schedule put her in diplomatic meetings until 0900, which gave me a solid 40-minute window to grab actual food instead of protein bars eaten in the dark like some kind of dystopian cave creature. The cafeteria was blessedly empty except for a few night shift workers. And I was actually relaxing for the first time in weeks when I heard it. A sound so unexpected and devastating that my hands froze halfway to my coffee cup. Crying. Someone was crying with the kind of quiet, broken sobs that suggested they didn't want anyone to hear. And I knew with horrible certainty whose voice it was, even before I peered around the partition and saw her. Princess Lyria sat alone in the observation alcove, still wearing what I recognized as yesterday's outfit. A fitted tactical style jacket over dark pants that somehow looked both professional and elegant. Her platinum hair falling forward to hide her face as her shoulders shook with suppressed tears. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to maintain my protective distance. But my feet were already moving before my brain caught up. Because whatever else I was, I apparently couldn't walk away from someone in pain. Especially when I was the cause of it. Princess Lyria, I said quietly, and she went absolutely still. The crying cutting off so abruptly, it was like someone had flipped a switch. She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge my presence, and the silence stretched so thin, I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I moved closer slowly, like approaching a wounded animal, though the comparison felt insulting, given that she was actually royalty and I was the one who'd been scurrying through walls. I know you've been looking for me, I started, my voice sounding pathetic even to my own ears. And I owe you an explanation. That's when she turned, and the sight of her face nearly knocked me back a step. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, luminescent tears still tracking down her cheeks. And her expression held such a devastating mixture of hurt and anger and relief that I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. An explanation? She repeated, and her voice was rough from crying, but also sharp with something dangerous. You saved my life and then vanish for 23 days, as if I carry some sort of plague. You avoid me so thoroughly that I began to question whether the entire incident was a hallucination. And you think an explanation will suffice? I'd expected anger, maybe even cold, royal dismissal, but not this raw pain that radiated from her like heat. I'm sorry, I said, the words inadequate and pathetic. But she cut me off with a sharp gesture. Do you know what the Tal Shara bond means to my people? She demanded, standing now, and I realized I'd never seen her this unguarded, this furiously, devastatingly real. It means that when you pulled me from that airlock, when you risked your own life for mine, the universe itself recognized a connection between our souls. It is not a burden or a political inconvenience. It is the highest honor one being can show another. She took a step toward me, and I forced myself not to retreat. For 23 days I have searched for you, worried that perhaps you were injured, or had regretted your heroism, and slowly began to understand that you were simply avoiding me. Specifically, me. And do you have any concept how that feels? Her voice broke on the last word, and fresh tears spilled over. I thought perhaps you found me repulsive, that binding yourself to an alien was so horrifying that you would rather live in hiding than face me for even a moment. The words hit me like physical blows, and suddenly I was moving forward, closing the distance between us without thought. No, I said urgently, and her eyes widened in surprise at my vehemence. Lyria. No, that's not. You're not. I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated at my inability to form coherent sentences when it actually mattered. You're incredible. You're brilliant and kind and so beautiful it actually hurts to look at you sometimes. which I know because I've been looking from a distance like a creepy stalker, and that's not helping my case. I took a breath, forced myself to meet those devastating violet eyes. I wasn't avoiding you because of who you are. I was avoiding you because I'm terrified of ruining your life. She stared at me like I'd started speaking in quantum equations. I'm nobody, I continued, the words tumbling out now in a desperate rush. I'm a junior liaison who lives in a 400 square foot apartment and still uses the same coffee mug from university. And you're a princess with the weight of an empire on your shoulders. And this tall share bond means you're stuck with me, influencing decisions that affect billions of people. And what if I'm wrong? What if my advice leads to disaster? What if you end up resenting me? Or worse, what if the bond forces you into feelings you wouldn't naturally have, and you wake up one day realizing you're trapped with someone you never would have chosen? The silence that followed my verbal explosion was deafening. Lyria's tears had stopped, and she was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between astonishment and understanding, and maybe the faintest hint of amusement. You've been hiding in maintenance tunnels, she said slowly, because you're worried about my well-being. I shifted uncomfortably. When you say it like that, it sounds almost noble, instead of pathetically cowardly, she laughed. An unexpected sound that was half sob, half genuine mirth. And suddenly she was closing the remaining distance between us and taking my hands in hers, which were surprisingly warm and trembling slightly. Marcus Chen, she said, and hearing my name in her voice, with its melodic Celestian accent, did strange things to my chest. You are perhaps the most frustrating and endearing human I have ever encountered. The tall share bond does not create false feelings or force compatibility. It simply recognizes what already exists, a connection. A resonance between two souls that the universe has deemed worthy of protection. Her thumbs traced patterns on my knuckles, and I forgot how to breathe. I have not been searching for you these past weeks because tradition demands it. I have been searching because from the moment you pulled me from that airlock, speaking reassurances in that calm voice while your hands shook with adrenaline, I wanted to know you. The bond did not create my interest in you. It merely formalized what I already felt. My brain was short-circuiting, attempting to process this beautiful, impossible woman saying impossible things while holding my hands like they were something precious. But the political implications, I started weakly, and she shook her head, will be navigated together. The tall share bond does not mean you must make decisions alone. It means we face them as partners. Your perspective as someone outside imperial politics is valuable precisely because it is different from my own. She smiled, then, soft and genuine, and I felt my carefully constructed walls crumbling like tissue paper. Though I admit I would have preferred to discuss this without spending 3 weeks believing you found me so intolerable you would literally hide in sewage processing areas, I winced. You knew about that? Marcus, my security detail has been tracking your movements since day 3. I have been deliberately not cornering you because I hoped you would come to me willingly. Though my patience was clearly running thin, the image of her receiving daily reports of my increasingly desperate hiding spots was mortifying enough that I actually laughed. And then she was laughing too. And somehow we'd moved closer until I could see flecks of silver in her violet eyes and count the tears still clinging to her unfairly perfect eyelashes. I'm sorry, I said again, but this time it felt weighted with meaning beyond simple apology. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I let fear control me instead of just talking to you like a rational adult. And I'm sorry it took seeing you in pain to finally get my act together. Her expression softened into something that made my heart stutter. And now that you have, as you say, gotten your act together, what happens next? It was a loaded question, one that held the weight of tradition and choice and possibility all tangled together. I took a breath, decided that if I was going to do this, I was going to be brave about it. Now I'd like to actually get to know my fate companion, I said, testing out the term and finding it didn't feel as heavy as I'd feared. Maybe over dinner that doesn't involve me eating protein bars in the dark. And I should probably meet your advisors officially instead of just overhearing them discuss my unsuitability while I'm hiding in air vents. Lyria's smile could have powered the entire station. I would like that very much. Though I feel I should warn you that my chief advisor will likely subject you to intensive scrutiny and possibly several tests of character. Can't be worse than the past 3 weeks of self-imposed exile, I said, and she laughed again, the sound filling something in my chest I hadn't realized was empty. There is one issue we have not addressed, she said, her tone turning more serious. The tall share a bond, while not forcing feelings, does create certain expectations in Celestian society. People will assume our relationship will progress in particular ways. I knew she was talking about the marriage statistics I'd researched. The cultural weight of life binders becoming life partners. I think, I said carefully, that we should focus on getting to know each other without the weight of expectations, bond or no bond. Let's just see what develops naturally. Her bioluminescent glow brightened visibly, and I was beginning to understand. It was tied to her emotional state, like a mood ring written across her skin. You continue to surprise me, Marcus Chen. Most people bonded to a princess would be eager to claim the associated status and benefits. Most people didn't spend 3 weeks in maintenance tunnels having existential crises, I pointed out, and she squeezed my hands gently. I have a confession, she said, and something in her tone made me nervous. The airlock malfunction was not entirely an accident. My blood went cold. What? She had the grace to look slightly guilty. The malfunction was real, but I had disabled the automatic emergency protocols earlier that day. I wanted to test the station's manual override systems after noticing inconsistencies in the safety reports. My scientific advisor said I was being reckless. You deliberately put yourself in danger to test a hypothesis? I asked, torn between horror and a grudging admiration for her hands-on approach. Which means you could have saved yourself. She shook her head. The override panel was damaged in the decompression. I had miscalculated. I would have died if you had not intervened. Your heroism was entirely genuine, even if my presence in that airlock was not entirely coincidental. She looked up at me with those devastating eyes. Does this change things? Does knowing I was partially responsible for the circumstances of our bond make you regret it? I thought about it, really thought about it, and realized that the fear that had driven me into hiding had nothing to do with how the bond formed and everything to do with my own insecurities. No, I said finally, if anything, it makes you more relatable. I've been so busy thinking of you as this untouchable princess that I forgot you're also a person who makes reckless decisions and tests hypotheses in potentially deadly ways, which is concerning from a safety standpoint, but also kind of refreshing. Relief flooded her features. Then perhaps we are more compatible than you feared. After all, you made the reckless decision to enter a decompressing airlock without proper safety equipment. I had safety equipment, I protested, and she raised one elegant eyebrow. A magnetic grapple and 15 seconds of held breath is not proper safety equipment, Marcus. You held your breath? There wasn't time for a suit. Her laughter was warm and genuine. Two reckless fools bound by fate, she said. The Empire is surely doomed, probably. I agreed, and then we were both laughing again, the tension that had stretched between us for weeks finally releasing. The observation windows behind us showed the stars wheeling past as the station rotated, and I became aware that we were still holding hands, that we'd been holding hands through this entire emotional conversation, and it felt natural in a way that made the bond seem less like a burden and more like a gift. So, I said, about that dinner. Lyria's smile was radiant. I know a Celestian restaurant on the promenade that serves food which will not make you hide in maintenance tunnels afterward. They have this dish called star grain risotto that glows when properly prepared. Glowing food. That's either amazing or terrifying, I said, and she tugged me toward the exit. You saved my life by pulling me from an airlock, and then avoided me for 23 days by living in service tunnels. I think you can handle luminescent cuisine. As we walked through the station together. No more hiding or avoiding. I noticed people staring, because apparently a junior liaison holding hands with an alien princess was notable. But Lyria's presence beside me made the attention feel manageable, like we were facing it together, rather than me drowning alone. Can I ask you something? I said, as we waited for the transport lift. Anything, she replied. What made you keep looking? After a week, 2 weeks, wouldn't it have been easier to declare me unworthy of the bond and move on? She was quiet for a moment, considering. There is a Celestian saying, the soul recognizes its mirror even when the eyes refuse to see. From the moment you pulled me from that airlock, I felt that recognition. And I am not someone who abandons a puzzle unsolved or a connection unexplored. She glanced at me. Though I admit by week 3 I was beginning to question my stubbornness. I'm glad you're stubborn, I said, and meant it. The lift arrived and we stepped in, the small space, bringing us close enough that I could see the subtle pattern of constellations in her luminescent skin, like someone had mapped the stars across her. "This is going to be complicated," I said, not a question, but an acknowledgement. "Undoubtedly," she agreed. "Your government will have concerns about a liaison being bonded to a foreign princess. My advisors will have opinions about proper courtship protocols. And we will have to navigate the cultural differences between our peoples while under considerable scrutiny." "That sounds absolutely terrible," I said. She grinned. "Yes, but we will navigate it together. And is that not better than hiding in tunnels, eating protein bars in the dark?" "Literally anything is better than that," I admitted. And her laugh echoed in the lift. When we reached the promenade, Lyria led me through the crowds with confident grace. And I realized this was what I'd been avoiding. This public acknowledgement that we were connected, that I mattered to someone who mattered to so many. But with her hand in mine and her presence steady beside me, it felt less like drowning and more like learning to swim. The restaurant was beautiful, all crystalline architecture and soft lighting that made Lyria's skin glow even brighter. And when the star-grain risotto arrived, it did indeed glow with a soft, golden light that tasted like nothing I'd ever experienced. "This is incredible," I said around a mouthful, and Lyria's smile was smug. "I told you glowing food was not terrifying." Over dinner, we talked about everything. Her research into quantum mechanics and her hobby of collecting ancient musical instruments. My work in xenocultural studies and my terrible addiction to old Earth cinema, and with every shared story and laugh, the bond between us felt less like fate's imposition and more like fate's gift. Not creating something artificial, but revealing what had been there all along. As the evening wound down and we stood outside my very modest apartment, Lyria looked at me with those expressive eyes that had haunted my dreams during my weeks of hiding. "Thank you," she said softly, "for finally stopping your running. For being brave enough to face me. Thank you for being stubborn enough to keep looking," I replied. "And for not giving up on someone who definitely deserved it." She reached up and touched my face gently, her palm warm against my cheek. "The tall share a bond will be what we make of it, Marcus Chen. No more, no less. We have time to discover what that means." I covered her hand with mine. "I'd like that. No more hiding. No more avoiding. Just two reckless fools figuring it out together." Her smile was brilliant enough to rival the stars visible through the station windows. "I believe that is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." "Really?" "Because it sounded kind of awkward in my head. Most romantic things do," she said. And then she was leaving with a final squeeze of my hand and a promise to meet for breakfast. Actual breakfast in the cafeteria like normal people, instead of protein bars and maintenance tunnels. As I stood in my doorway watching her walk away, surrounded by her guards, who gave me assessing looks that suggested future conversations would be had, I felt something settle in my chest, a sense of rightness that had been missing during my weeks of fear-driven avoidance. The tall share a bond hummed between us like a frequency only we could hear, not controlling or constraining, but connecting. And for the first time since that airlock incident, I thought maybe, just maybe, saving the princess's life hadn't been a mistake at all. It had been the beginning of something neither of us had chosen, but both of us were brave enough to explore together. The stars outside my window seemed brighter somehow, full of possibility and promise, and somewhere on this station, a princess with platinum hair and pointed ears was probably smiling, glad that her stubborn persistence had finally broken through one terrified liaison's defenses. Tomorrow would bring complications, political ramifications, cultural navigation, and probably some very intense conversations with her advisors. But tonight I allowed myself to simply feel grateful that I'd finally stopped running, that I'd faced her tears and found not disaster but hope. Not burden, but connection, and maybe, if we were brave enough and lucky enough, something even more extraordinary than fate's design. The universe had recognized something between us, and after 23 days of fighting it, I was finally ready to discover what that something was, one glowing meal and one honest conversation at a time.